Mara Sloan was 27 when the night that split her life cleanly in two began with a family dinner she never agreed to attend. The house in the suburbs looked normal from the outside, white siding, trimmed hedges, porch light glowing. But the moment she stepped inside, something felt staged. Folding chairs crowded the living room. Borrowed tables stretched wall to wall. At least 30 relatives turned to look at her, conversations stalling like a record scratched mid-song. No one smiled. No one stood. No one said her name with warmth. "Hey," Mara said, softly, unsure who she was speaking to. Her cousin glanced up, nodded once, then turned back to a story about a promotion. Someone else laughed too loudly. Mara stood there, holding her bag, waiting for a cue that never came. Frank Sloan cleared his throat at the head of the table. "You're late," he said, not looking at her. "It's Sunday," Mara replied. "You said 6. Carolyn Sloan didn't turn around. "Sit wherever you can find space." The only open chair was at the far end, half blocked by a cooler. Mara dragged it out herself. "Before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. Your one click really helps support the channel." As plates began moving down the table, no one paused for her. She watched roast chicken pass by twice. Rachel leaned toward an aunt and whispered something that made them both glance at Mara, then look away. "So," Frank said, raising his glass, "let's talk about real milestones. Engagements. Babies. New houses." Mara listened as if through water, each word reminding her of what she hadn't done right. When she tried to join in, "I just wrapped a big product launch at work," Carolyn interrupted without looking at her. "We'll get to that," she said coolly. "Later." Mara didn't know it then, but later was already too late. Halfway through dinner, Carolyn stood and walked toward the wall of framed family photos. Her heels clicked sharply, each step deliberate. Mara watched, confused, as her mother stopped in front of a row of smiling faces. Christmas sweaters, graduations, vacations. Carolyn reached up and pulled down the first frame. Then another. Then another. "Mom," Mara said. The room went silent as glass clinked against glass. Carolyn didn't answer. She carried the frames to a trash bin placed beside the table, as if someone had planned for this. One by one, she dropped the photos inside. Mara's face stared up from the heap, cracked by reflections. "I'm done pretending," Carolyn said, her voice calm, practiced. "This one contributes nothing. She takes and takes." Mara stood. "What are you doing?" Frank finally looked at her. "Sitting you down," he said. "For once." Carolyn turned. "You're 27, Mara. No husband. No children. No stable career. Do you know how much money we spent raising you?" Mara's mouth went dry. "I have a job." Rachel pushed her chair back sharply. "A hobby," she said. "Let's not lie." Frank leaned forward. "You owe us. Every dollar. Tuition. Rent help. Insurance. You think that was free?" "I never asked." Rachel stood and pointed toward the door. "Please don't make this harder." No one objected. Not one person. Mara looked around the table, faces she'd known her whole life, now carefully neutral. She picked up her bag. "I didn't come here to fight," she said quietly. Carolyn folded her arms. "You came because you still think you belong." Mara nodded once, then walked out. No shouting followed. No footsteps. The door closed behind her with a final, ordinary click. The ride back to her apartment passed in a blur of streetlights and silence. Mara didn't cry. Her hands shook, but her face stayed still. When she reached her place, she dropped her keys on the counter and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. The quiet pressed in. "They don't see me as family anymore," she thought. "I'm a balance sheet." She opened her laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. Instead of texting a friend or replaying the night in her head, she opened a blank document and typed one sentence in all caps. "This is not about feelings." Carolyn Sloan was a senior loan officer. Frank Sloan ran a heating and air business that always seemed to survive rough patches. Rachel built a career counseling students about ethics and choices. Mara exhaled slowly, forcing her thoughts into order. Letters had started arriving months ago. Bank mail she didn't recognize. A credit alert that made no sense. She had ignored it then. Tonight made that impossible. Her phone buzzed. A missed call from Frank. Then another. She flipped it face down. "Not now," she whispered to no one. She pulled up the official credit report site and requested every bureau. While the files loaded, she paced her apartment, counting her steps. When the reports opened, her stomach dropped. Accounts she had never opened. Addresses she hadn't lived at in years. Phone numbers she recognized. "No," Mara said softly. Then, after a pause, "Oh." She created a folder and began saving everything. Screenshots, PDFs, old photos of envelopes she'd once laughed off as junk. By midnight, her shock had cooled into something sharper. They didn't just humiliate me, she realized. They exposed themselves. By morning, Mara had a timeline spread across her table like evidence. College. The joint account Carolyn had insisted on. "Just to help you manage bills," her mother had said, smiling. Passwords saved. Mail redirected. Access never revoked. Her phone lit up again. Rachel this time. "You embarrassed everyone," Rachel texted. "Mom is devastated." Mara didn't reply. She called the identity theft hotline instead. She spoke slowly, clearly, answering questions like she was under oath. When the agent asked if the suspected parties were family members, Mara paused, then said yes. After placing fraud alerts and freezing her credit, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but steady. This wasn't revenge. It was containment. Later that afternoon, she opened her design software. If she was going to tell this story, she would do it right. Clean layout. No names. No drama. Just facts. Her phone buzzed again. A message request from an unfamiliar username. "I saw your post on LinkedIn," it read. "Are you okay?" Mara frowned. She hadn't even realized it was circulating yet. Another message followed. "This might sound strange, but does your mom handle everyone's finances?" Mara stared at the screen, a slow chill moving through her. She typed back carefully. "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "It's Nancy. Your aunt." Mara closed her eyes. The puzzle pieces shifted, locking into place with a clarity that made her chest ache. "Can we talk?" Nancy wrote. "Privately." Mara picked up her phone and stepped onto her balcony, the city humming below. "Yes," she typed. "We need to." Nancy's voice trembled as she spoke, not with fear, but with recognition. "I thought it was just control," she said. "I didn't think it was theft." As Nancy described loans she didn't remember taking and letters Carolyn told her to ignore, Mara typed everything down. Dates. Amounts. Bank names. It all matched. When the call ended, Mara sat very still. This wasn't an accident. It was a system. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a photo. Frank beside a brand new vac truck, grinning. The timestamp lined up perfectly with one of the loans. Mara saved it. That evening, she emailed a consumer rights attorney and attached her growing file. She didn't dramatize. She didn't beg. She stated facts. Her parents thought the dinner had ended her place in the family. What it had really done was free her to follow the money without guilt, without silence, and without looking back. 2 days later, Rachel Sloane texted Mara as if nothing irreversible had happened. "Can we talk? Coffee. Downtown. No apology. No acknowledgement of the trash can or the door. Just an assumption that time had softened everything." Mara stared at the message for a long moment, then replied yes, not because she wanted reconciliation, but because curiosity had replaced anger. They met at a quiet cafe near Mara's office. Rachel arrived first, already seated, fingers tight around a paper cup. She looked exhausted, makeup hastily applied, posture rigid like she was bracing for impact. "I'm glad you came," Rachel said quickly. "Mom's been beside herself." Mara sat down. "You threw me out of the house." Rachel flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then tell me how it was," Mara said evenly. Rachel exhaled. "Everything blew up. Stress. Money. You know how Dad gets." Mara opened her bag and slid a thin folder onto the table. "Do you recognize this address?" Rachel glanced down. Color drained from her face. Their parents' home appeared again and again beside Mara's name. "Mom was just helping," Rachel said weakly. "Helping requires consent," Mara replied. "And signatures." Rachel swallowed. "She did some things for me too. Consolidations. She said it was safer if she handled it." "Did you read what you signed?" Rachel didn't answer. The silence did it for her. Mara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She pulled out her laptop and turned the screen toward Rachel, scrolling through documents with methodical calm. "This loan was opened 3 years ago," Mara said. "The same month Dad replaced his work truck." Rachel shook her head slowly. "That can't be connected." "Then explain why the mailing address is our parents' house and the contact number is Mom's." Rachel pressed her lips together. "She said it was temporary." Mara leaned back. "Temporary fraud is still fraud." Rachel's eyes filled, but she blinked it back. "You filed reports?" "Yes." "With regulators?" "Yes." "With lawyers?" Mara paused. "I will." Rachel stared at the table. She could lose everything. Mara's voice stayed level. "She's already taken it. From me, from Nancy, maybe from Grandma." At that, Rachel looked up sharply. "Grandma?" Mara nodded. "Who handled the house sale?" Rachel's shoulders slumped. "Mom." "Who explained the numbers?" Another pause. "Mom." The realization settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Rachel rubbed her temples. "I thought she was protecting us." "She was protecting control," Mara said. Rachel whispered. "What do you want from me?" "Every email. Every text. Anything involving money." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "I'll send everything." For the first time since the dinner, Mara felt something crack, not in herself, but in the story her family had told for years. That night, Mara built a timeline that no longer belonged to memory or emotion. It belonged to facts. She placed her own accounts beside Nance's documents and the pieces Rachel had reluctantly forwarded. Patterns emerged with brutal clarity. Crises followed by Carolyn's intervention. Signatures collected quickly. Questions discouraged. Money moved. She sent the updated file to the attorney, who replied the next morning with a single sentence that steadied her spine. "This is actionable." Meanwhile, the infographic Mara had posted quietly gained traction. Messages poured in from strangers describing eerily similar experiences. Parents opening credit lines. Spouses helping too much. Family trust used as leverage. One message stopped her cold. "I think your mom did this to us too." It was from a cousin. Mara responded carefully, urging them to pull their reports. Within hours, the cousin confirmed irregularities. The fallout began subtly. Frank stopped calling. Carolyn's messages shifted tone, from anger to forced calm. "We need to talk rationally," she wrote. "You're misunderstanding things." Mara didn't reply. She forwarded everything to her attorney instead. A state investigator called the following week. The conversation was clinical, respectful. "Did you authorize these accounts?" "No." "Did you benefit from these funds?" "No." "Do you believe your personal information was used without consent?" "Yes." Each answer felt like a brick being laid, solid and irreversible. When the call ended, Mara stared out her window at the city. She wasn't destroying her family. She was documenting it. Carolyn showed up at Mara's office unannounced the next Monday. The receptionist messaged her, "Your mother is here. She seems upset." Mara walked into the lobby and saw her mother standing straight-backed, immaculate, clutching a leather folder like armor. "Mara," Carolyn said brightly. "We need to clear this up." "Here is fine," Mara replied, gesturing to the chairs beneath the security cameras. Carolyn's smile tightened as she Saturday. "I saw something online. A graphic. People are asking questions." "I posted educational material," Mara said. "No names." Carolyn leaned forward. "You're jeopardizing my career. You jeopardized my credit." Carolyn's voice dropped. "I helped you build it. You built it on lies." Carolyn straightened. "Families don't take each other to court." "Families don't forge signatures," Mara replied. For a moment, Carolyn's composure cracked. "If this goes public, it hurts everyone." Mara met her gaze. "You should have thought of that before using my social security number." Carolyn stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake." Mara didn't stand. "No. I'm correcting one." As her mother walked out, Mara felt an unexpected calm. The power had shifted, not through shouting, but through refusal. The investigation unfolded slowly, methodically. Carolyn was placed on leave from the credit union pending review. Auditors requested files tied to relatives. Names repeated. Addresses repeated. Patterns hardened into evidence. Nancy was interviewed first. She cried afterward, not from guilt, but relief. "I wasn't crazy," she told Mara over the phone. Rose Bennett's lawyer arranged a deposition at her assisted living center. When Rose saw the numbers, she whispered, "I trusted her." Mara closed her eyes as she listened. Frank tried once more, calling late one night. "You've gone too far," he said. "This started years ago," Mara replied. "I just stopped ignoring it." Civil filings followed. Loans were frozen. Assets scrutinized. Carolyn's employment was terminated. Frank sold part of his business to cover settlements. The house with the wall of photos went on the market quietly. Rachel transferred school districts. "I didn't know how wrong it was," she admitted in a long text. "But I know now." Mara's credit was restored. Her name cleared. The freeze remained, by choice. One evening, months later, Mara sat alone in her apartment, reviewing the final document from her attorney. Everything was clean. Closed. Corrected. The family dinner had been meant to erase her. Instead, it had given her permission to stop pretending, and the clarity to finally walk forward. The public version of the Sloan family unraveled quietly, without spectacle. There were no police lights, no dramatic confrontations in the street. Instead, there were envelopes, emails, and meetings behind closed doors. Carolyn's credit union issued a formal notice requesting interviews with anyone whose loans she had personally processed over the last 5 years. The list was long and uncomfortably familiar. Mara learned about it from Nancy first. "They asked why your mother's login appears on so many family accounts," she said. They weren't subtle. Mara pictured her mother sitting in a sterile conference room, realizing that charm and authority didn't work on compliance officers. For years, Carolyn had controlled the narrative by exhausting people into agreement. That tactic failed when everything was written down. Frank tried to regain footing by reframing the situation. He sent a group message about loyalty, about outsiders who didn't understand how families helped each other through hard times. No one replied. Silence, Mara noticed, had finally stopped protecting him. At work, Mara kept her head down. She finished projects early, answered emails promptly, and avoided discussing anything personal. When her boss Joshua Lane asked gently if she needed flexibility, she said no. Stability mattered more than sympathy. At night, she reviewed documents and slept lightly. The anxiety hadn't vanished, but it had direction now. She was no longer reacting. She was tracking. And that made all the difference. The first hearing in the civil case happened on a gray Thursday morning. Mara didn't attend. She sat at her kitchen table instead, hands wrapped around a mug, while her attorney texted updates in real time. They are leaning on family arrangements. Judge isn't impressed. Signatures don't match. Mara imagined Rachel sitting in the gallery, watching their parents try to explain away years of financial decisions as misunderstandings. The defense relied on implication and emotion. The evidence relied on numbers. Later that afternoon, Rachel called. "I've never seen Mom look that small," she said quietly. She kept saying she was trying to help. "Intent doesn't erase impact," Mara replied. Rachel was silent for a moment. "I used to think you were dramatic." Mara didn't respond. "I don't think that anymore," Rachel added. That night, Mara received confirmation that several fraudulent accounts tied to her name had been formally removed. Her credit score corrected itself in clean, unemotional increments. Watching it happen felt strangely anticlimactic, like closing a book she had been forced to read too young. The relief didn't come as joy. It came as space. As settlements progressed, the cost became impossible for Frank and Carolyn to hide. The suburban house went on the market without a goodbye party. The new vac truck disappeared from Frank's social media photos. A business partner quietly bought into the company, bringing oversight instead of admiration. News traveled through relatives in fragments. Some were angry with Mara at first, accusing her of betrayal. That changed when a few of them ran their own credit reports. Messages arrived cautiously, privately. "Thank you for saying something." Mara answered without judgment. "Check everything," she advised. "Document it." Nancy invited Mara to lunch one afternoon. They sat in a quiet diner, sunlight catching dust in the air. "I wish I had spoken up sooner," Nancy said. "You spoke when it mattered," Mara replied. Rose Bennett sent Mara a handwritten note, the letters uneven. "Thank you for not letting them make you small," it read. Mara folded it carefully and placed it with her legal files, not as evidence, but as balance. For the first time, Mara felt something close to pride. Not for winning, but for refusing to disappear. The website Mara had built grew slowly, shared in forums and private messages rather than loudly promoted. People wrote to her describing situations that mirrored her own. Parents opening cards to help. Relatives insisting on joint accounts. Trust weaponized as convenience. Mara responded when she could, careful not to give legal advice she wasn't qualified to give. She pointed people to resources, urged documentation, encouraged them to trust discomfort. At work, Joshua mentioned that a client had complimented the clarity of Mara's designs. "You make complicated things feel manageable," he said. She smiled. That's the goal. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her mother had used complexity to confuse. Mara used clarity to protect. Rachel and Mara spoke occasionally now. Not warmly, but honestly. Rachel admitted she was untangling her own finances, learning to read every document before signing. "I don't think I ever really questioned her," Rachel said once. "I know," Mara replied. There was no accusation in her voice. Just truth. Months after the dinner, Mara stood in her apartment, reviewing the final settlement documents. Everything was resolved. Accounts corrected. Liability assigned. Boundaries enforced. She thought about the version of herself who had walked into that house and sat in the far chair, waiting to be acknowledged. That version no longer existed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Frank. She read it once and didn't respond. Some conversations were finished without needing a reply. Mara closed her laptop and stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched out below her, ordinary and alive. She hadn't rebuilt her life overnight. She hadn't transformed into someone fearless. But she had done something quieter and harder. She had chosen herself, without shouting, without cruelty, and without asking permission. The silence that followed surprised Mara more than the shouting ever had. Weeks passed without calls from Carolyn. No sudden apologies. No attempts to rewrite history. The absence felt deliberate, like a door finally closed on both sides. Mara learned through Nancy that her parents had moved into a small rental on the edge of town, far from the neighborhood where they had once hosted picture-perfect barbecues. Frank was struggling with the loss of control at work, bristling under the oversight of a new partner who demanded documentation for every decision. Carolyn was applying for jobs outside finance, her resume suddenly heavy with explanations she could not smooth over. Mara absorbed these updates without satisfaction. Consequences were not something she needed to witness to believe in. They existed whether she watched or not. At night, she reorganized her apartment, clearing out old paperwork, shredding documents tied to the years she had spent half aware and half compliant. The act felt symbolic but practical. She was done carrying unnecessary weight. Rachel visited once, unannounced but cautious, standing in the doorway like a guest rather than a sister. They talked over tea, the conversation slow and careful. "I don't expect forgiveness," Rachel said. "I just didn't know how deep it went." "I believe you," Mara replied. That didn't erase the past, but it softened the edge of it. Rachel spoke about transferring districts, about colleagues who whispered, about learning to sit with discomfort instead of deflecting it. "I'm trying to be different," Rachel said quietly. Mara nodded. "That's all anyone can do." When Rachel left, Mara felt neither relief nor resentment, only clarity. Their relationship would be rebuilt or it wouldn't. Either outcome would be honest. The website continued to grow, slowly but steadily. Messages arrived from people who had pulled their credit reports for the first time because of something Mara had written. Some were angry. Some were relieved. All were awake. Mara updated the site occasionally, adding clear steps and plain explanations. She avoided dramatics. The truth didn't need embellishment. Joshua encouraged her to take on a leadership role at work, trusting her ability to manage complex projects with empathy and precision. Mara accepted, recognizing the quiet symmetry of it. She was building systems now that protected people instead of trapping them. On weekends, she walked through the city, letting routine anchor her. Life felt ordinary again, and ordinary, she realized, was a kind of peace. News of her parents reached her less often as time went on. When it did, it came filtered through others, stripped of urgency. Frank's business stabilized under new management. Carolyn found part-time work unrelated to finance. They existed, adjusted, endured. Mara no longer felt responsible for their outcome. She had documented the truth and stepped back. The rest was theirs. One evening, she reread Rose Bennett's letter. The ink faded but steady. "Don't let them make you small." Mara smiled faintly and placed it back in its folder. Some lessons were worth keeping close. Looking back, Mara understood that the dinner hadn't broken her. It had clarified everything. It showed her exactly where she stood and gave her permission to stop negotiating her worth. She had learned that family loyalty did not require silence, that love was not measured by how much harm you were willing to absorb, and that protecting yourself was not betrayal. Mara closed her laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed knowing her name, her real name, was finally her own. Mara Sloan never went back to that house, and she never needed to. The version of family she lost that night had already been hollow long before the door closed behind her. What replaced it was quieter and smaller, but real, chosen relationships, honest work, clean records, and a life no one else could quietly borrow from. She kept her boundaries firm and her documentation tighter, not out of fear, but out of respect for herself. When people asked how she learned to be so careful with money, with trust, with access, she didn't tell the whole story. She didn't have to. The truth lived in how she moved now, deliberate, informed, unashamed. The dinner that was meant to erase her ended up doing the opposite. It stripped away illusion and left her standing in something solid. Mara didn't win by destroying anyone. She won by refusing to disappear, by choosing clarity over silence, and by walking forward with her name, her future, and her life finally aligned. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to protect yourself. Silence only protects the people who misuse trust. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end. If you've ever had to choose clarity over comfort, you're not alone, and you're not wrong.